The second Genestealer Cult faction member, an 82nd character overall, is on their way to Tacticus, as the Patermine, the Genestealer Patriarch, will be looking to become your psychic sugar daddy. Today we'll look at whether they should be joining your team or just sent back with their tail between their legs. Coming very soon after Magus Zybia, we have the second Genestealer Cult member, but this is no ordinary member. This is their legendary character and the granddaddy of the cult, the Patermine. We learned a bit about the Genestealers at the start of my Zybia video, and they are just a horrific faction, taking over whole communities by any means necessary, and as a Genestealer Patriarch, the Patermine is a psychic abomination, alpha predator, and a parasitic demigod, and much worse. They prowl in the shadows of embattled worlds, and are the source of the biocorruption that spawns each Genestealer cult cell. It's definitely an unlucky lady that has to deal with a French kiss from this horror. As always in this series, we're going to take a look at 3 different things: how long it roughly takes to level him up to Diamond 3 when compared to other characters, his traits and general usefulness, how good he is in legendary events, and I won't be looking too much into his usefulness in guild raids or tournaments, as I leave that to our other wonderful content creators. So let's dive right in. The Patermine is unlocked in the next legendary event, Alien Majesty, starting on November the 3rd. It sees you collecting ascension points by completing missions, which are then converted into synthesized germ seeds. These allow you to open industrial crates which have Alien Majesty shards and other goodies within them. These shards can then be used to unlock and level up the Patermine. As always, I'll do a full deep dive into their legendary event straight after the first one is completed, so that we can level the appropriate characters for the second and third event, if we feel the Patermine is any good, of course. And just before we continue, I want to give a little shout out to Peanut Aura on YouTube, who supported my channel with a super gift, and that was such a wonderful boost to receive. It really makes me feel the love, and so just a huge shout out for taking a moment from your life to give something to the channel. So thank you so much for making my day. And let's start by looking at roughly how long it takes them to level from Stone 1 to Diamond 3. The reason I say roughly is because my sheets don't take into account all the extra ways you can get free energy, like in the tournament arena, nor getting items gifted from your guildmates or from the daily shop. It also doesn't take into account any hard to get items that haven't been added in lots of places yet, but even with all that in mind, it's always interesting to see how they compare to the other characters. For the Patermine, he definitely isn't the easiest character to level. He comes in at 62nd position, which is quite a bit higher than his faction buddy Zybia, who is down in 73rd position. I'm definitely surprised about this, as this faction isn't following the recent releases, which have been easier and easier as we go further into the year, and so it definitely reinforces my guess that this faction should have been released much earlier in the year. I'm very curious to see what happens when the next faction is released, whenever that may be. Overall, he takes 36 days to go from Stone 1 to Diamond 3, and we can see all of that over on the graph. It takes the Patermine 3 days to go from Stone 1 to Bronze 1, another 2 days from Bronze 1 to Silver 1, 4 days to Gold 1, 13 days to Diamond 1, and then 14 days to Diamond 3. Which of course all adds back up to the total 36 days. So with him not being the easiest character to level, let's see if he has anything in his kit that would make him a worthwhile pickup. We'll start with his traits. He is a Xenos character, and he has an eviscerating 5 melee attack. He has no ranged attack, and he can infiltrate, which means he doesn't trigger Overwatch and can sneak past the pesky Revas. He has a Synapse trait, which means he plays well with other Tyranids, and friendly units within 2 hexes ignore the effects of instinctive behavior and battle fatigue. He is terrifying, which means he takes 30% less damage from melee attacks, and that makes him slightly interesting for legendary events already. And finally, he is unstoppable, so he can move over fire, razor wire, and broken ice without stopping. With a movement of 4, that means he can really get around the battlefield. And before we continue with the rest of the abilities, I want to introduce a new section to the Does This Character Do Anything series. And this is something I've been wanting to do for quite some time but couldn't work out the best format. It is to be able to do a decent comparison of the character's damage and defense. The difficulty in judging these is that the game is so incredibly complex that it's very difficult to find a fair measurement. I spent an evening digging into how to calculate the effective damage and defense in a spreadsheet, and it ended up with a really interesting deep discussion about damage on Discord with one of the legends of the game. The very fact that I had to go through it step by step with him means that there is no point in trying to do this in a good way in Excel right now, especially when it comes to the complexity of looking at traits and passives and everything else. So instead, I decided to do something much more fun. I will just say in advance that this isn't the most precise experiment, but it is a pretty good indicator of where people are in terms of defense and damage. So starting with damage, we're going to take the character that has the armor closest to the average armor of all characters and that doesn't have any defensive traits. Then we're going to have every character stand beside him, target him, and we'll record the damage shown. This will be known as the effective damage of each character. All of the characters will be Diamond 3 and have no weapons or armor equipped. They will be stood on flat ground and there will be no one around to boost them. And their passive skills will all be at level 30. This means the experiment is going to be as fair as possible. But we need a willing punching bag. And amazingly, the character that is closest to the average armor of everyone and doesn't have any major defensive traits is the one and only Castellan Creed. So welcome back to the stage, Creed.
Thank you. What am I doing here?
Well, we just need you to stand over there and we're going to move in some characters to check how much they could hit you for.
But they are not actually going to hit me? Right? Right? Ow! Oof! Ouch! What the fuck?
Okay, let's take a look at the results for melee and range damage tables from the Castellan Creed test. We can see for melee damage that Karn is easily top of the list, and the amount of damage that this beast pumps out is insane. He is definitely the most damaging character in the game right now, and this is the reason I'm currently leveling him to Diamond 3. The Black Templars came in next with Brother Jaeger and Sword Brother Godswill, and I don't think this would be a surprise to anyone with their attack right now. I think the only surprises in this top 10 list would be Tiark and Cut Skoden, both of whom do a very decent amount of damage. With regards to Tiark, I have a small prediction that very soon we're going to start seeing a rise in teams that simply jump straight into the enemy from a distance. We are seeing more and more champions like Matanio and Mephiston, and often in games that are developing, we see a movement power creep around the second year, which leaves the other fatter champions in the dust. So have a play around with that in the next tournament arena, and you might find some pretty annoying things to play with. For the melee damage, it's the ranged and psyker champions at the bottom of the list, and Makotep is right at the bottom, and in fact it's a wonder he even has the strength to open his own internal circuits with that weak an arm. All of this can be visualized in the graph on the right, but where's the Patermine? Well, they appear in a very healthy 17th position, and you can see them over there on the center left of the chart. As for range damage, it's a much smaller list of champions, and the Patermine is not one of them. But for the rest, we can see Thaddeus and Shosil raining hellfire from above, but a decent surprise to me is Shadowsun, and I have to say that I've really enjoyed playing Tau in the most recent tournament arena battles. Just don't tell Nandi I said that, or he won't leave me alone with his tales of the greater good. At the other end of the scale, I think the biggest disappointment here is Morven Val, who I finally opened up in my last video, and I've been leveling quite a bit. I think she has a lot of potential as a character generally, but this is a good reason why she's being held back right now. Obviously, the extra crit trait that the sisters all have won't have been shown here in full effect, but still, it's a weak shot she has. Okay, but what about defense? We'll just do the same test in reverse. Creed, are you still there?
Yeah, what was that all about? I will be writing a stern letter to the Imperium as soon as I can feel my hand.
Don't worry about it. I know how much you love a trip to Isabella for some personal healing. In the meantime, you can get some revenge. I need you to go and target everyone and then record the effective damage you would do.
Yes, sir!
And these are the results of how good characters are at blocking. We're looking at how much damage Castellan Creed would have done to them, so the lower the number here, the better they are in defense. And the first thing that jumps off the page now is that the Terminator armor buff that we had recently is such an important thing to have against the first attack of the game. Obviously, if I'd done 5 attacks and took an average, then the Terminators would move back the list a bit, but honestly, I think this is a fair representation of their defensive prowess. Interesting to see Niall up here, and I'm really curious to see how he stacks up after this change. He's been another completely ignored character for such a long time, and maybe now is the time to have a look at him a bit more. I think Faction Wars has definitely given me an interest in these ignored characters. At the other side of the chart, Macer just wants to take as much damage as he can, and this is because of his low armor value. I was a bit surprised to see him here, but I think any of these bottom 15 would melt like paper against any champions doing decent damage. Just imagine Karn against 5 of them. It would be like a firefly in a tissue factory. For the Patermine, he is in 33rd place and is just above average. A decent position though, and it means that he'll be able to take a punch or two before dying.
Please, can I go see Isabella now?
Yes, off you go now, Creed. Thank you for a valuable mission. Coming back to the Patermine skills, his passive is Cosmic Horror, which is in the healing category of skills. Whenever the Patermine kills someone, it drops a decoy where they died, and these decoys were something introduced with the first Genestealers Xibia. When this decoy is dropped, there is a chance of suppressing adjacent enemies and triggering their battle fatigue. Finally, the most important part is if the Patermine moves onto the decoy, then they're going to heal themselves. And this skill is definitely interesting in some legendary event battles because he's going to be killing, healing, and triggering battle fatigue. The last part being important because it means he might actually have a chance to collect the decoy that is dropped. Should this be prioritized as a skill for new players? I wouldn't unless you're specifically leveling Genestealers. His active is Might from Below, and this falls into the spawning category of skills. First though, it does a chunk of damage to an adjacent character by hitting them with a massive psychic attack, and psychic attacks deal 100% pierce ratio, so it's always going to hit for a bit of damage. Then for every adjacent decoy, they summon a pure strain Genestealer that can immediately attack in melee combat. These spawns have a Bio 3 melee attack, Ambush, which means they're going to respawn once they die if there's a free decoy available. They have Infiltrate to avoid Overwatch, and they're unstoppable, so they move around the battlefield freely. That's a pretty good spawn, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it hit in the battlefield in anger. Should this be prioritized as a skill over others? It's a spawning skill, so I always recommend to level them when you're a new player. So what do I think about his traits and skills? Well, firstly, it's obvious that he will really work well with characters that drop a lot of decoys, and as we gain more Genestealers, I expect them to have even more decoy abilities, so he's very much a faction character. If we ignore that element about him and look at him as a character in his own right, he's not bad. He's more deadly than someone like Death Leaper that is meant to be a melee combat character, and also that eviscerating attack is pretty cool because it does 50% piercing damage, and we've seen how handy that is from the Karn already, except the Patermine has 5 hits instead of 4 against one character. Obviously Karn can hit 2 characters, but still I think this is pretty good. He has more health and a bit less armor than Karn, but I like him, and that is the same vibe I got from Xibia. I've actually been playing a bit with Xibia since I opened her, and she hasn't failed to intrigue me, so it feels like the Genestealers might really be a faction I level up a bit. In terms of the modes he fits into, we're going to need to check his legendary event's usefulness shortly, but with a good heal, psychic damage, terrifying to lower melee damage taken, Synapse trait, which means him and Tyrant Guard can roam around the map together, Tyrant Guard's defensive trait always being switched on, as well as the Patermine's battle fatigue and creating spawns. Wow, this is going to be a really interesting character to try out for sure. For Tournament Arena, right now we're stuck in meta hell where Ragnar is wolf howling in the top ranks and Metanio is hammering the lower levels, so I don't know if he will really fit into one of those teams right now, but he's not the worst. In guild raids, I still don't see him replacing any of the meta characters in a major way right now, but let's see what the other creators say about that one. And in guild wars, he's gonna be someone the enemy has to focus down, so a decent addition to any team. And so who does he work well with? I've kinda alluded to this already, but there's a couple of people I'll be pairing him with specifically. Tyrant Guard and Xibia. Tyrant Guard will be a pretty mobile tank, and the two of them can deal out a decent amount of damage together. Then you have Xibia behind them, dropping loads of decoys for healing or spawning characters, and if you throw in Winged Prime, which I think might be a really underrated character in the game right now, as he also works with the Synapse synergy, he will create lots more spawns. And if we want to stick with the Xenos theme until we get more Genestealers, I think I would put in someone a little bit more tanky in here, or maybe just a real sniper like Morgan Ra or Calandis to protect Xibia in the backlines. And that's actually a pretty damn strong team, isn't it? And so overall, I'm really liking this Xenos Cult creating creature, and I think I'll definitely be aiming to get him pretty highly leveled. So moving on to the legendary event scores, let's see how he does. We'll start with the Karn event. In the alpha track, he appears in the ranged battle. In the beta track, he appears in the minimum 3 hits, no Terminator armor, and no big target battles. In the Gamma track, he appears in the no mechanical, minimum 5 hits, and no flying battles. And that gives him a very respectable score of 375, which is well over the average and very close to the 400 score that I usually say is a good mark on this legendary event. Moving to the Mephiston event, in the Alpha track, he appears in the melee, minimum 2 hits, and psychic battles. In the Beta track, he appears in the no big target and minimum 3 hits battles. And finally, in the Gamma track, he doesn't appear because he's a Xenos character and no Chaos and no Xenos are allowed in this track. And so he ends up with a good score of 285, which is again above average. And so if we move to the best teams overall, we can see that for legendary events, the Patermine appears in 17th position, which is an incredibly good score. And obviously we still need to see how he's going to do in his own event, but generally he is going to be someone who is definitely interesting for legendary events. And so along with Xibia, it's just been such an interesting faction so far. I'm definitely interested in them. But what do you think about the Patermine? Is this Patriarch going to be the king of your cult, or will he be joining your other ignored collection of Xenos sitting at Stone 1? You can check him out right now in the latest version of the Google Planner Sheets linked below.